The 1983 IFBB Mr. Olympia contest was held in Munich, Germany, and produced by Mr. Albert Busick, the publisher of Sport Review, the German equivalent to Muscle and Fitness magazine. Albert has a reputation of being a perfectionist, and when I first entered my hotel room of the Munich Hilton, the best hotel in the city, and set eyes on the magnum of chilled champagne laying in the silver ice bucket, I began to think the reputation had substance. As events unfolded, I was soon totally and utterly convinced Albert Busick always goes first class. 6,000 fans packed the Olympia Hall, and I doubt if one was disappointed in the high caliber of physiques presented on stage. Earlier, Samir Bannout had shown no one his physique, but had excitedly proclaimed to one and all that he had improved by some 25% over last year's appearance. And we all know that Samir was ripped to shreds in '82. Standing in the hotel foyer was Chris Lund. Samir approached to offer his salutations. When he told me about his improvements over last year, I asked him to raise his shirt so I could see his abdominals. He shook his head. Chris Lund laughed. "He won't show you, Bob. He's not showing any of us." After a few minutes' conversation, Samir left us and turned the corner for the elevator block to return to his room. As Samir stood there waiting for the elevators to arrive, he noticed the strong overhead spotlights indented into the ceiling. He couldn't resist. Samir called out, "Chris Lund, Bob Kennedy." We looked around the corner, and there stood the smiling Samir, his shirt pulled up, displaying a set of unbelievable abdominals. We knew then that Samir Bannout was ripped, and that it would indeed take some kind of wonderkind to beat him at the Olympia the following day. But truth to tell, Mr. Bannout nearly blew it that night at the IFBB Pro meeting. He called to ask one of the judges, Ludwig Nosek, whom Samir complained had placed him so far down the list at the London Olympia that it was a national disgrace. Nosek defended himself by admitting that he was only human, and if an error had been made, then it was only done with best intentions. He assured Samir that he had nothing against him personally. In the heat of the moment, Mohammed Makawi then addressed the floor. "I suggest," he said quietly, "that we behave more rationally. If anyone had a reason to complain in London, it was myself. Most writers said that I should have won last year, but I have said nothing. I decided to shut my mouth and train harder than ever for this year's contest. I accepted the decision last year, and win or lose tomorrow, I will again accept the decision." It was at this meeting that Britain's Bertil Fox made a plea for the most muscular to be one of the compulsory poses in the IFBB judging format. The idea was dismissed, but not before Zane's heart had missed a beat. Back in 1976, the same Olympic complex had undergone tragedy. The Olympic festivals of that year had gone underway with great expectations. The entire city was bubbling with pride and joy when the crack of rifle shots had climaxed in numerous deaths of athletes, among them several Israeli Olympic lifters. The mood sobered abruptly to one of dismay, anger, and gloom. Today the beautiful Olympia Hall was bathed in autumn sunshine, and once again the mood was bright and cheery. Everyone was expecting a great Olympia. First, the introductions. In order, Betty and Joe Weider, Mrs. Schwarzenegger, Arnold's mother, Joe Gold, Wayne DeMilia, Jacques Blomart, Oscar State, and Ben Weider. Even the writers and photographers in the press area were introduced. Top lensmen like John Balick, Mike Naveau, Art Zeller, Bob Grushkin, and Chris Lund. Rick Wayne, and Bill Reynolds too. Ben Weider paid numerous compliments to Albert Busick and his organizational ability on behalf of the IFBB and officially declared the show underway. And then came the first big surprise. Arnold and Franco were introduced. Each gave a short speech, and Arnold extracted the first laughs from the audience by declaring his love for Munich, because it was so nice to see all the Munich women arise again. In the audience, Arnold's mother buried her head in her hands, but it was difficult to see whether she was laughing deliriously or hiding from mock shame. I suspect the former. After being entertained by comedians, singers, flex appeal, and being introduced to Germany's team for the IFBB World Bodybuilding Championships in Singapore, the audience was treated to the superb posing display of robot man Russ Testo. The New Yorker, first discovered at Arnold's Columbus Olympia, is a good bodybuilder in his own right, but it is his sensational mime that captures our hearts. Russ climbs invisible ladders, pushes away unseen obstacles, and battles with imaginary foes, all with the awesome strain of Hercules performing his legendary labor of old. Testo is the master of robotics, an unsurpassed entertainer of mime and movement, and as he climaxes his unforgettable act, one cannot help but wonder how sensational any of the Olympians would appear if they could pose with equal professionalism. He's here, Thomas Platz, the all-American boy. He feels like an abandoned bride at a wedding. Tom is here, not to compete, but to guest pose. It was his intention to compete, but my bicep is still bothering me, and I can't compete unless I'm at my best. And Tom decided to be the '83 Olympia special guest poser, and special he was. After completing his sensational routine, in which he carefully refrained from directly posing his still unbalanced right arm, Platz was afforded a standing ovation by the appreciative Munich crowd. "You give us all the energy to do what we do, and I want to thank you for that," he announced over the microphone, and he meant it. Tom says he'll be at the New York 1984 Olympia, vying for the crown again. At this show, Tom was given a resounding ovation. It's difficult to say why Johnny Fuller was overlooked at this show, because earlier he had been very much noticed by virtue of the fact that he was sporting a new bushy mustache and custom-designed sunglasses. Johnny looked more like a film star than a bodybuilder. But on stage, he played down his appearance. He began his routine by standing straight, allowing the audience to appraise his front, then his side, and then his back. Only then did he start to pose. Bang, right into a most muscular. He followed this with a somewhat scattered array of attitudes, many of which included placing his legs in rather awkward positions, all to unsuitable music. The end result was only moderately impressive, yet the famous Fuller's physique was as good as ever. Improved presentation will make us all more aware of just how good he is. Making a bid for the Olympia fame once again was Ed Corney from Hawaii. It's been a while since the silver-haired Ed entered the contest, so everyone was wondering whether he was making an all-out attempt to win the Olympia, especially in view of the fact that he would be 50 years of age a month after the show. Watching Corney pose is no longer magic. He is the unsung hero of the open-handed transitions used by so many bodybuilders today, and it is extremely unlikely that an Olympia contestant has not been influenced by Corney's posing in some way. But try as he may, the feel had gone. Corney was under-tanned and too heavy. Throughout his routine, he was breathing with his stomach. Perhaps in any other company, he would have been singled out as a human phenomenon. At this show, he was Ed Corney, out of shape. Give the man his due, along with a handful of others, men like South Africa's Roy Hilligan. Corney has mastered and trounced the age barrier and can compete in any contest. Personally, I would like to see him dye his hair black, compete with a deep tan, and come in ripped to the bone at 10-pound lighter body weight. Perhaps too the posing would come back if everything else was in line. Posing to Eye of the Tiger was Dale Rupplinger. He has a way to go to impress in this company, and after all does have good proportion and persistence. He will no doubt start to place well in this advanced contest. Dale's big thrill was when Joe Weider asked him to come down to California for a photo session. "I guess that's all a guy could want," says Dale, who definitely had stars in his eyes. The posing of James Goldberg carried him along, but physically he hasn't got much to offer in this Olympia lineup. The former Mr. Universe was in shape, but his physique is not aesthetic enough to stand on its own, especially since he cannot fall back on supermassiveness. Sometimes bodybuilders are accused of being arrogant, even over-arrogant, whatever that may be. One man who could never fit this mold is Germany's Hubert Metz. His apparent, almost painful modesty defies explanation. He appears so fearful on stage that you find yourself wondering if he used to having a tomato thrown at him. Yes, he was ripped. His thighs were bigger. His chest a full inch deeper. But how can one truly care when this raw muscle is accompanied by such obvious neurosis, preventing him from communicating even by the vaguest smile or gesture with an audience who want nothing more than to respond with generous applause at the drop of a hat. Now that the bitch tits have been taken care of, Herr Metz should concentrate a little more on his only real physical deficiencies, his neck and calves. But I doubt very much if he can climb higher on the pro ladder, at least not until he gains or feigns an assertive confidence when presenting his body to a packed auditorium. The first Frenchman to win an IFBB World Championship was lightweight winner Jacques Nouvel. He beat the highly touted Tom Bilknap. Today, Nouvel got the crowd clapping and cheering heartily because of his choice of music, but about halfway through his routine, they realized that here indeed was a very fine physique. The rhythmic clapping changed to resounding cheers and appreciative applause. Nouvel, who has a handsome physique, was pleased with the reception. Even in the lineup he came across, well, unfortunately he was lopped off triceps, which serve to shortchange many poses in which he displays his arms. Attitudes where the arms do not play an important role, such as front and back lat spreads and specific abdominal and chest poses, show him as little short of incredible. Jacques duplicated many of Zane's poses as his routine climaxed. Unfortunately, his plan to annex the Olympia title fell short. Zane proved not to be the man to beat on this occasion, but it should be well and truly noted that Frank Zane did look every inch a world beater. He was smaller than last year, yet he looked bigger, less vascularly, yet thinner skin. His mind was definitely zeroed in for such a win. What a joy to see such a truly beautiful physique. While lesser mortals posed and compared under the stage lights for the judges, many eyes were riveted upon Zane's incredible shape as he stood in the background, his wide shoulders, the muscles in which he appeared to be able to control at will, even while standing normally, the perfect pec line, thick column neck and traps, the handsome face. Like a Greek statue in the flesh, Zane is invariably the people's choice. He presents, as writer Peter McGuff puts it, the acceptable face of bodybuilding. His posing is on par with the likes of men such as John Brown, Chris Dickerson, and Muhammad Makawai, even though he doesn't use the transition time between poses to enhance his routine as these men do. If one squeezes out the most nitpicky criticism, it would be that Zane has lost a little on his lower outer thigh and could use a tad more bicep height. Period. He can only be called to task by the dyed-in-the-wool hardcore advocate who would see Zane not as an ideally built human being, which he is, but as a man who failed to recognize that bodybuilding is the art of building as much muscle mass as can be stacked on a given Homo sapiens frame. There's the rub, for Frank Zane is no Bertil Fox, nor, in all probability, would he want to be. Zane's back had transformed since his Wembley appearance, and I should add that his calves and thigh biceps were so revolutionized that I could hardly believe what I was seeing. What a man. The night before the Olympia, Lance Dreher was experiencing some cramping in the stomach. Perhaps he had overdone the diet. After giving the problem some thought, he took in a little water, which relieved the pain, but brought with it the concern that perhaps it would smooth him out. Manager Jim Marchand confirmed that the water had had no detrimental effect. Whatever the case, heavyweight world champion Lance failed to pull it all together in Munich. It wasn't as though he was bad, just the opposite. He was good. But because of his failure to shine in any one category, he went unnoticed and was placed at the bottom of the pack. There are many things Lance can do to change things around because he is genetically suited to bodybuilding. It seems that he was not sufficiently motivated to go all out in his preparation for this show. Placing well in a contest like this involves having a near black tan and posing like a zealot, all in addition to being cut, ripped, and stacked with awesome, shapely muscle. Lance has the muscle, but this show was a step backwards instead of forwards. Like Samir, Dickerson before him, and Zane before him, Lance Dreher's day will come. It was clear we were in Germany when Josip Wilkos made his entrance. The crowd were hot for him, realizing perhaps that he was the most likely representative to succeed. Josip is a nice guy, genuine to the core, too genuine. Apparently, the false showmanship needed to shine on stage is beyond him. He stands like a statue, his face like stone, expressionless. There is no snap, crackle, pop. Out there on the stage, he is relying solely on body language to project his muscles. It doesn't work. As the biggest man in the contest, Wilco shows a glorious amount of beef, but is not sliced quite to the liking of the judges. Sitting at my side, Arnold Schwarzenegger hinted to me that he would like to give Wilkos a few tips, but that perhaps the German was too proud to ask. Personally, like all weightlifters turned bodybuilders, I feel that Jusip should concentrate more on shaping movements, as has Muhammad Makawi, also a former weightlifter. And hurling down the gauntlet of greatness was indeed Muhammad Makawi. He came into the show as one of the men to beat, perhaps even as the favorite. Every inch a professional, Muhammad descended the steps to the stage like a gazelle. Again, to Chariots of Fire, the most significant music he can find, Muhammad gracefully acknowledged the cheers of the crowd who were still wildly applauding even before he had commenced to pose. Magic indeed. The color, proportion, and separation were all there, but a degree of sharpness that he had at the previous Olympia was absent, and though he subsequently gained his sharpness the following week, where he swept to the victory in the Swiss, Swedish, and British Grand Prix, it was not at the Olympia where he most needed the edge. But there were pluses. Muhammad's 60 sets of back work each training session, directed by Vince Gironda, had paid off. Actually, Muhammad did a different back routine each workout over a 3-day training period. His back was not only thick but wide, and right here at this contest, his arms were the biggest they had ever been. In spite of having mistimed his peak by a day, Muhammad was bubbling with confidence. Was he the only competitor genuinely enjoying himself? Each pose seemed like a personal celebration of his hours of training. His consultations with his nemesis, Ken Wheeler, and trainer, Vince Gironda. The Egyptian glides, flies, sweeps from pose to pose, building additional shapes of beauty as each transition shifts under the white-hot lighting. Chris Lunn calls him the Magic Egyptian, and right before our eyes, here now at the Olympia Hall in Munich, Muhammad has come down from the mountain and is casting his spell upon an open-mouthed audience of monomaniacal iron pumpers, each of whom clamors noisily for more and sighs openly when the Egyptian leaves the stage. Such unforgettable performances become indelibly stamped into the annals of bodybuilding history. Looking at Lee Haney, one has to be envious. Those wide shoulders and narrow hips, what more could a bodybuilder want as a foundation on which to build? Add to that the luxury of small bones and eugenically superior calves, and you have a 1 in a million bodybuilding great. Further to that, Haney does not have the all-too-common angry young man chip on his shoulder, linked with many modern-day fellows. I should speak out clearly. Lee Haney does not have a good attitude. He has a superb attitude. Of course, who knows what's really going on in his mind? Maybe he feels that the judges are shafting him, that in fact he should be the current Mr. Olympia. If these are his thoughts, then he's covering it up well. The truth is he wasn't shafted. In spite of having bodybuilding's most gifted genetics, he is still a little down on the arms, and he has to get on with a posing routine that surpasses mere muscle display. It should excite the eye with movement, shape, change of pace, and combine to present his physique as its ultimate so that the judges have no alternative other than to give him an unqualified yes at future showings. Al Beckles looked worried, and strange as it may seem, he appeared facially pale. But going by his physique, he should have been the proudest man at the show. Al is pushing 50, but has the muscle size and tone of an extremely finely trained 25-year-old. Because he has been slightly bigger in the past and posed with more assertiveness, he did not make the finals this year, but there are no real reasons for him to be out of the running. One can only point to the close competition of finely honed bodies and shrug one's shoulders. Beckles was there, but did not make it evident that he had come to win. But yes, Samir Bannout had come to win. After last year's failure, the Lion of Lebanon had come in heavier and almost as cut as his appearance last year. In fact, more cuts came in as the contest wore on. At various times during the judging and just prior to the evening show, he had picked up a stomach pain, which caused him anxious moments. Many were already concluding that he wouldn't be able to make the evening appearance. Dr. Franco Colombo, 1981 Mr. Olympia, and a qualified chiropractor, pulled and pushed Samir's joints, while yet another MD, Ludic Nosik, remember the name, administered oral antacids to quell the rumbling tummy. "Man, Franco, you worked magic. I feel much looser in my posing," quipped Samir, as he swaggered on stage. "If you win," joked Franco, "I'll send you a bill." Looking on, Dr. Nosik just smiled and wished Samir well. The hint of earlier bloat disappeared, and Samir took the best of Fox and Haney's bulk, mixed with it the Zane and Macaui's aesthetics, and romped home a clear winner in every category. One outstanding aspect, unique to Bannout, was his incredible lower back control. He could and did pose unseen aspects of his lumbar region, which astounded the judges and those in the audience near enough to make the observation. And then there was the Fox, the quiet English gentleman who virtually hides backstage and would rather train in a dungeon than a normal health club. The man who moved from London, England to Los Angeles, California because of his reported greatness, yet who curiously, although he had psyched out virtually all the other pros when he first arrived, had never since managed to win an IFBB pro contest. Since settling in the USA, Bertil's contest experiences have alternated between poor to fair. His critics have pointed out that his size isn't everything, that he has a labored approach to his presentation. Well, that was yesterday. Enter the new Bertil Fox. Slowly, with apparent difficulty, he descended the steps to the stage, and the predominantly German crowd, who loved mass to begin with, welcomed Bertil to the posing stage, and though he was a prodigal son, with a gusto of cheers and applause, but even they were caught off balance when his routine all but exploded. He kicked in with a flurry of poses that brought the fans bolt upright in their seats. His calves and arms looked bigger than ever. Bertil has such incredible biceps that they not only look good in the double biceps from the front, but also when seen from the back, and even when he does a side chest display. Bertil gave us a few new poses and cocked his finger a couple of times when raising his massive arms, but there was no real change. His routine was better, but not because of improved positions or transitions, but because it was more assertive and performed as a fast, dynamic pace. So how much better was he? Was he really that good? Well, he was good enough to make Rick Wayne momentarily forget Lee Haney. Good enough to get Arnold up out of his seat, shouting and screaming, "Now that's your Mr. Olympia." Good enough to move Chris Lund, a man normally in control of his senses, who had labeled Fox almost 3 years ago as the greatest physique of all, to fire off a dozen shots with his Mamiya and find himself standing in a fluster of frenzied emotions, both thumbs pointing to the sky and shouting, "You've done it, Bertil. You're the greatest." Good. At this show, Bertil was sensational. At the end of the routine, Fox was kept longer by the crowd. The music was over, but hardly a note had been heard anyway. He fired off 6 more heavy-duty poses, which brought the entire audience to their feet, their noisy acclamation pouring down from the rafters, and in the middle of it all, Mr. Fox, bathing in adulation, aggressively mimicking anger, repeatedly pointed to the crowd in a way that suggested, "See, I told you, I told you. Didn't I tell you I was great?" Nobody was arguing. Not then, at least. After a brief pause, the 6 finalists were brought out on stage. Muhammad Macawi, Frank Zane, Lee Haney, Giuseppe Wilkos, Samir Bannout, and Bertil Fox. So far, so good. The pose down began. Fox was getting nowhere because he was under a poor light, and Muhammad couldn't make an impact because he was at the far end. A little shuffling and the excitement caught fire. First, Fox and Haney go at it, then Fox and Macawi. All the time, Zane is doing his thing in a world of his own, but the judges appear confused by his abundance of mass. His magnificence almost seems out of place amid the preponderance of most musculars. Samir, Wilkos, Haney keep cool with a steady input of heavy attitudes. Mr. Wilkos was called out as the 6th place winner, and the crowd accepted the decision with a polite applause. Next to be announced, in 5th place, Bertil Fox. Now comes trouble. In mass, the crowd became first unruly, then raucous, and finally totally unforgivable. They whistled and booed so loudly, and for so long, many at the front of the audience had to cover their ears to risk damage to their hearing. Arnold and Franco moved out. The judges looked first uneasy and then downright scared. I remember thinking to myself, the crowd is keeping this up because they simply won't accept Fox as 5th place. They are demanding that the judges change their minds. After almost 6 minutes, it seemed that a change could be a real possibility, but somehow the crowd's annoyance subsided, and 4th place Frank Zane was announced. He was riveted with shock, but forced to pose and a smile before following Fox off stage. Lee Haney took his 3rd placement well, and then we were left with Samir Bannout and Muhammad Makawi, holding hands in good-hearted anticipation. It went to Samir, who was instantly congratulated by a smiling Makawi, always the gentleman even in defeat. Samir received the traditional Sandow statue, while the other 5 finalists received engraved cups plus porcelain figurines for their wives. The show ended with a gaggle of photographers crowding the new Olympia winner. I would like to thank Albert Busick, Joe and Ben Weeder, my girlfriend, Samir continued as he posed for television and still cameras alike. At the party that night, at Albert Busick's super gym, Samir gave even more of a thank you speech. He related how he had first got into bodybuilding after seeing a picture of Arnold Schwarzenegger on the cover of Muscle Builder magazine. This brought hoots of laughter from Arnold, who was sitting nearby and obviously enjoying the accolade, while filling his mouth with lobster. The next day in Munich, Hilton Breakfast Buffet Lounge, a massive Greg DeFaro appeared looking as though he had spent a night out on the town. No one quite knew why he had arrived a day late, but the question was on everyone's lips. How well would he have done had he been in the contest the day before? Surely a few heads would have toppled.